Does this increase your capacity to love? This is a question that I reflect on all of the time. It impacts the way that I lead in my home, the way that I lead in my job, the way that I lead with my clients. And I'm so excited for today's episode of Plan Goal Plan. I'm joined by Marcel Schwantes, a global thought leader in leadership and employee engagement. And Marcel's also an author of a 2025 book, Humane Leadership: Lead with Radical Love, Be a Kickass Boss, which I dig so much because he has this revolutionary framework for leading with love, patience, humility, and trust. And we're going to dive into all of this today. So if you are looking to show up to lead yourself from a space of love, to lead others with a space of love, whether that's in your work or whether it's in your home or in your community, today's episode's for you. So let's do this. Marcel, welcome. I'm so excited that you're here.
So glad to be here. I can't wait to get going on this discussion.
I'm really jazzed for this. I care deeply about good leadership. I think that it is sometimes easier to imagine what good leadership is than it is to practice good leadership. And I also really love that you embrace, love in action and
Uh-huh.
this idea of the connection between love and leadership. So
Mm,
I'd love to, begin with you telling a little bit of your own story of how did you get interested in this?
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to go back to my corporate days. So that's going 20, 25 years ago, way before I started my own coaching practice, is I worked at a hospital. And it was one of the most toxic work environments I've ever been in or under. And it led to health issues. I ended up in ER. I was basically paralyzed from the waist down. And all of that was because of the stress level had gotten so high for so long that my ER physician said, well, basically your back couldn't hold it any longer. You had way too much cortisol and adrenaline rushing through your brain because every day, 8 to 10 hours a day, I'm looking over my shoulder pretty much all day. And so being in that constant state of bombardment is not sustainable. So after recovery, I ended up in another job, which had a completely different management style. I call it servant leadership. And as I started to investigate, well, what the drastic change, it was a complete 180 from the previous hospital to this current, two hospitals, right, back to back. And my boss was very much a servant leader, and I felt cared for. And this evolved the conversation to what makes these kind of leaders stand out. And over the years, I started to do more research to inform my practice, and things like kindness, empathy, compassion kept rising to the surface. And we're talking about in the leadership ranks of some of the most profitable companies on the planet, right? And so as I investigated the sort of the features and the traits and behaviors of caring leaders, I'm like, why don't we just call it for what it is? Because all of these things that I'm reading about, I practice at home in my community, right? And they're loving behaviors, right? I'm kind to my child and I love my 12-year-old, right? And I'm married and same thing, right? So all of these principles are carried over in whatever your sphere of life or influence is, home, work, right? If you're involved in community-based work, education, nonprofit, for-profit, private, public, it doesn't matter. They basically work across the board, right? And so I decided to call it for what it really is, right? Care. Yeah, a lot of people like to stop at caring, and I extended out to call it for what leadership really is. True leadership is about loving other people. And so the whole idea and the premise of the book is that when I started to investigate what makes really high-performing organizations flourish, it comes down to 5 loving leadership behaviors. One is leadership is patient. The second one is leadership is kind. Third is leadership is humble. Fourth is leadership advocates for people. And the last one, which kind of all the others kind of lead to this last one. This last pillar is leadership is trustworthy. All roads lead to trust. And so this became the framework for the book. And that's basically what I arrived at. So here we are.
I love it. That's beautiful. My sister is a chaplain in a hospital, and that is a position that requires so much like love and empathy. You're holding
Mm,
space for people at a time of, grief and mourning, and it's oftentimes surprising and not always what, they expected. And it always surprised me that hospitals, for example, that are spaces of health and care, that the very people that work in them, the systems, the processes, the structures, don't actually support, are not designed for health. And I think about that in higher ed, where I work
mm,
as well, that if I want to create a generation of students who have a healthy relationship with themselves and their work, I have to live it.
yeah.
Right. I mean, as a parent and as a teacher, if there's anything I've learned, it's that I cannot out teach things that I am not able to model.
Hmm.
And
Right.
so, yeah, I think if we want spaces that are humane, then we have to lead in a way that's humane, that's from a space of love. How do people respond when you're like talking about love? Because I think that like love is this ooey gooey thing that sometimes also we separate from our professional spheres, that somehow like that doesn't have a space in our professional lives.
Right. So here's what I think. If I was on this crusade in 1995, I probably would have been run out of buildings and run out of stages, right? And but over the years, especially since post COVID, I think that we caught on to the fact that there's an immense amount of suffering in the workplace.
Mm.
And I mean, I don't have the data's out there, right? So toxic workplaces lead to a lot of health issues and just people suffer. I mean, the example of me ending up in ER and on disability and paralyzed from the waist down, right? And luckily that was a temporary paralysis. It was basically my back gone out and I could not move for about 2 months. There's people that are literally dying because of toxic work environments. And so we need to get to the understanding that love works in workspaces. So like the hospital example, I think that it is a requirement for leaders and hospital administrators and even MDs and how they treat nurses, but especially administrators in charge of departments that serve the patient population, for them to create loving spaces, because the correlation is clear in the data that when you take care of the people, taking care of the patients, the patient satisfaction score will go up tremendously. And so it would make sense, wouldn't it, that if you work in these high pressure, front facing, sort of customer facing or client or patient facing environments, doing the caretaking, and then you're going to notice a big difference in how patients and customers are going to feel when they're cared for by people that are being cared for by their leaders. So, and I think I've probably strayed away from your question now. I'm
Oh,
so sorry. I've sometimes I go on these tangents because I'm so passionate about like, how do we end suffering so that people bring their best selves to work and they're flourishing, and then we have great business outcomes. And sometimes I get so bogged down in that because I believe in it.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I think that I feel just so passionately that when we are operating from a space of well-being, that the amount of love that we have to give is so much more abundant. So that's wildly important to me. So I want to go
Yeah.
back to the pillars that you mentioned. I thought
Hmm.
that they were phenomenal. And I would love for you to maybe take one of those pillars. I thought the advocacy one was really interesting to me, but I would love for you to take those pillars and maybe talk about, well, what do these things look like in action? So like we
Yeah.
can like talk about like kindness, and that sounds like good and fine, but like what does kindness look like as practiced in the workplace from a leadership position?
There's a lot of data on what kindness is, and it's really not about being nice. That's one of the first misconceptions, is that kindness is nice. I think that there's two types of kindness that I found that I tracked in the research that work really well for leadership. And that's the first one is empathetic interactions. I mean, think about how often we have touch points between leaders and their employees, right? Throughout the day, if you call yourself a leader, you don't want to be invisible and not on people's radars, right? So the way that you practice kindness is always by first is active listening, right? So when interacting with a colleague or a direct report, you practice active listening and try to understand how the other person's feeling, not how you might feel in the same situation, but that takes a little bit of emotional intelligence and empathy to increase your understanding of what's going on the other side of the fence, right? And the other thing, a requirement for kindness is curiosity, right?
Yeah.
So you want to show genuine interest in others. So this means taking time to understand each team's unique needs, sometimes even their strengths, and how their strengths will actually work well for a project or a particular task that you didn't even know they had the strengths for, right? So that takes curiosity, asking questions, getting to know people, finding out what their interests are, what their goals are, but also what their unique needs are. Because if you have a team of 10 or 20, I can tell you right now that not everybody has the same needs. So this takes a good amount of empathy and curiosity to understand how they think, how they work, and then create or match work assignments to help them contribute both to high performance and meet the expectations of your clients and your customers. So that's a couple of examples. I mean, there are so many others. You can use kindness as a cultural value, right? When you talk about starting a culture, usually the usual suspects rise to the top: integrity, honesty, teamwork, or something similar, respect, right? But what is anybody talking about kindness as a cultural value that you want to sort of spread across your organization? And here's why that's important, by the way. And I'm glad I remembered this. There is research out there that I found that when kindness spreads throughout the organization with coworkers helping each other out, a snowball effect takes place. So the work atmosphere becomes more civil, less fear-based, and now with kindness begets kindness, where now employees are understanding that, hey, this is who we are, this is our identity, and so they start to reach out unconditionally to help one another out, and that spreads. It sends a signal to other people. Now imagine someone coming in from the outside that you just hired, and they see from day one how kindness is being displayed through things like empathy and respect and compassion, et cetera, right? And so that person is going to, from day one, understand, okay, this is an expectation
Yeah.
of how we behave, how we operate, how we conduct ourselves in relationship to one another. But then in a space of kindness, you have high performance because people are usually swimming in the same direction. And so it's great for building relationships, building community, and then all of that. I'm going right back to when you have those kinds of spaces, the correlation is it translates to better customer service. And I mean, whoever your stakeholders are, whoever you're serving internally or externally, they're going to feel it. So that's the outcome of having some like a culture of kindness.
You know what I love about that is the way that you articulate how kindness demands that we pay attention differently. It
Hmm.
asks us to pay attention. I love curiosity. And I don't know that I had connected curiosity and kindness. And I think that that's absolutely brilliant. One of the best leaders that I've ever had the honor of working under, he would sit with a journal, and I would see him all the time, just taking copious notes during meetings and things like that. And I never had an idea of what exactly he was writing down. And a little bit later, we had ran into each other. He was a provost at my university, and he was like, "Hey, I really remember this thing that you said and a meeting, like a year ago." And he was like, "I really think that these are some of your strengths, and I really see this." And I was like, "Whoa, you were paying attention." And like, I didn't know what you were taking notes on. He would sit in meetings, and his notes were notes about what other people's strengths were and things that he was learning from them.
Right.
And how different that is than maybe you've been taught to take notes in meetings to either just like collect the tasks that need to get done or take notes in a meeting, because you want to be able to respond to something. And I really think about the way that he was taking notes is a demonstration of this sort of kindness, leadership. And then he would communicate that back to you. And it was wild how validating it was to have a leader that was paying attention and then could speak back my strengths to me in a way where I was like, whoa, you see me.
There you go. That's right there. You nailed it. It's validation, right? I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel valued. And when those things take place in a workplace, all those things speak to somebody that is now using kindness as a way to like increase capacity and value around the organization, right? When you feel heard and seen, like your opinions matter. This is what a culture of kindness should feel like, is you feel validated as a human being, right? That you matter, basically. And that's the most kind thing you can do for an employee or a colleague, is to make them feel like they matter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things that I people are struggling with right now is trust, right? I've heard actually like in the entrepreneurial world that, we're in a trust recession. And it's really interesting to me because we don't talk about that using that language in higher ed. But I think the same could be said, that we don't necessarily trust that education is going to produce the skills and the knowledges that our students need. We don't necessarily trust that professors have our kids' best interests in mind as they're teaching them. And so, like, there is, I think, a trust recession across so many industry sectors.
Yeah.
I know that trust is really central to your work, and that's what you really end with. So, talk to me a little bit about why are we experiencing this trust recession, and like why is it a leader's job to cultivate trust?
Yeah, I think the why we're experiencing a leadership recession, I think you can kind of blame the political spectrum on that, and how that's permeated sort of every facet of our lives. And I'm not going to get into politics in this discussion, but pay attention to how even whatever narrative you subscribe to is influencing your worldview, so that when you come into a workspace where you're meant to collaborate and feel like you belong, and there's a healthy community and even healthy friction at times, right? Not everybody is going to get along or agree on something, but that's why we have constructive dialogue, to be able to respectfully disagree with someone and understand that, hey, I love you, man, but I think that this is the better route for us. And then that person say, okay, yeah, that's fine. I can come around to that because we're all here on the same team. Okay. And so I think we've lost the ability to even come to the table and talk about our differences. And I'm talking about in the workplace, right? And so we became suspicious of one another's worldview, intent, belief system, and put up walls. And in a healthy, collaborative, high-performing work environment, you can't have that. You can't operate in silo. So the walls have to come down. And so that's where trust comes in. But to get to trust, you have to work on all of those things that will break down the walls to get to trust. So one of the things I talk about in the book, and I have to borrow from Stephen M.R. Covey, who, by the way, endorsed the book. In his research, he talks about something so counterintuitive that I think some of your listeners are going to go, I can't do that. Well, here it is. Covey found that in high-performing organizations, leaders are willing to give trust to their followers first, and they give it as a gift before it's earned. Okay,
Yeah.
that's out there, right? It's been, especially in this day and age when we're like, no, I can't. They have to earn trust, and you're automatically suspicious. You got these Gen Zers coming in who may have the wrong idea about how work is. I'm an Xer. I worked hard. You got boomers now, right? So you got 4 generations under one roof, and they have completely different ideals and about work expectations. You got the boomers who are like, yeah, well, I walked 2 miles in the frozen rain both ways or something like that, right? And then you got the young people coming up that are mistakenly being labeled as lazy. And even the millennials, when they were coming around, I think it's indicative of just a generation of 20-somethings. Because even me, when I was 20-something coming in, I have some ideal or maybe visions of grandeur as well, right? We're not completely mature yet. So we have these ideas of how work is supposed to work, right? And so for those of us in leadership roles, we might not be 100% comfortable with extending so much trust that way, because you don't want to get burned. And so you have to protect the people that are inside. And so all those things are valid. But I think that if you come from a leadership standpoint that is humane and is to serve others first, you have to take risks.
Yeah.
And one of the things that leads to trustworthy behaviors where someone else may say, wow, my leader is really took a chance on me here. So what comes back? Trust comes back to you as the leader. Let me give you an example. In the book, I talk about how you trust other people first is to assume positive intent. Hey, if you're human, and that's 100% of us, I hope, maybe some aliens from other planets are listening as well, but people are bound to make mistakes. Okay. But the radical love that I talk about is to assume that people have good intentions behind their words or actions, right? Even if sometimes you might hear something that was, what was that about, right? It means giving someone the benefit of the doubt and not immediately assuming the worst thing about that person, because we're all different.
Absolutely.
And that's the strength of diversity. You're going to have the diverse thoughts and opinions and ideas. So assuming positive intent as a leader, as counterintuitive as that sounds, can actually improve communication. It can help with relationships and in the work environment. Then if you start to go that route, it can go the direction of building more trust, because now people are creating like, okay, well, I don't have anything to worry about because I believe, I hired you. You're smart, you're capable, you came with awesome reference. So yeah, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to assume that your intent here is great, and I'm going to extend that trust to you. So all that to say that when you act that way as a leader, what comes back to you are trusting behaviors as well, right? Somebody that's going to wow you and provide you with loyalty and commitment that you've never seen before. That's how it's supposed to work. I know that I'm being idealistic a little bit too.
It might be idealistic, but I
Mhm,
also think that moving from a space of I'm going to create the culture that want to believe is
mhm,
possible is such a beautiful thing. And, I think I was lucky that I was raised by my dad was my art teacher, and then he became a principal and a superintendent. And I realized looking back on it, how much he taught to me
mm,
about leadership. And he very much taught me that, like, whatever it is that you feel like you need, give it. So if you need validation, how are you validating the people that you work with, right? If you don't feel like valued, what are you doing to communicate value to the people that you work with? And I think I remember there was someone he worked with that I was not a fan of. And I remember having this conversation and being like, Dad, I don't understand. Like, why do you trust him? And I remember him telling me, you give trust.
yeah,
Give trust. It's not something that you make people earn. Everybody says that. And he's like, but just start giving trust. Yes, every once in a while you might get bamboozled, right? But like, watch the magic that happens
mhm,
when people feel like you trust them and they know that you trust them. Watch them thrive. Watch
yeah,
them show up and step up and become sort of like you are creating this space and the image for them to be able to step into that identity. And I think that that's so beautiful.
yeah,
One of the things that I work on with my clients is to think about this as self leadership, right?
mhm.
So, how do you treat yourself with kindness? How do you trust yourself? And so, I would love for you to offer some words of advice on how these same concepts can be applied to the ways that we communicate and treat ourselves.
I think we need to first inspect whether we have the capacity to love ourselves first
Mm.
before extending love out to others. And that can be defined in so many different ways for your listeners. How do you lead yourself with love? Practically speaking, these days, we have a burnout crisis. And so, how are you contributing to your own burnout, which is a lack of love in how you're treating yourself by working 70, 80 hours a week and thinking that that is sort of a badge of honor because you're getting more done? You're not. The research states that you become less effective and less productive when you start to work crazy hours like that. And multitasking doesn't work either to get more things done, according to the data. So I'm looking at ways to help with leading yourself first with self-compassion by treating yourself kindly. If that means that you take a day off, go to the spa, or have more self-care habits. Have you not gone for a walk out in the middle of nature or at a park? then step back and maybe look at why is that? What are your priorities right now if your health is suffering, right? So to me, that's the idea that to love others, you have to first love yourself, because if you don't have anything to give left for other people. And I think that's where self-kindness and self-compassion comes in.
I love this.
Yeah.
I think that your work is so needed right now. And, I do and I don't think it's idealistic. I think it is absolutely okay for us as a culture to demand that we show up with kindness and love and respect and trust. And that can really change the way that we connect with each
Yeah.
other and the things that we can create together. I think that it is the most generous way of moving through the world. So, if my listeners wanted to be able to connect with you, if they wanted to learn more from you, how can they do that, Marcel?
Oh, the best way to do it is through LinkedIn, and you'll find me there, Marcel Schwantes. And of course, my website as well, marcelschwantes.com. And I have a really cool Substack if anybody's interested in reading my Substack platform. Google and you'll find it. And I was just going to give you some parting words. Why is it that this is ideal for some people and not so ideal for others? I think those are the terms you use. I come down to belief and mindset. We have to first have the belief to know that this stuff works. And there's a world of evidence for 50 years or so that will back up that if you orient your leadership more towards all of the things we talked about, right? Radical love, it's going to work great for your organization. I think that the ones that might say, oh, this is so idealistic and so wishy-washy, fuzzy, those are usually the people that are not ready, and that's okay. They need to continue on their journey to hopefully eventually arrive at that crossroads. And sometimes it may be a hard, tragic, hopefully not tragic situation that will stir a new thought or idea about, wait, maybe I am running too hard. Maybe I am controlling too much and my people aren't responding. And yeah, my turnover is 40, 50%. Okay. Usually that's what it takes for somebody to put up the brakes and go, okay, there's got to be another way. Let's find out more about this whole idea of soft skills, and which I now call essential skills, right? They're no longer soft. Soft is the new hard. And so to me, that's how we remove the labels of this is too idealistic and bring this into this new world that we live in, that when you lead through love and care and compassion, good things are always going to happen because that's how humans are designed. So I'll leave you with that.
Well, thank you so much, Marcel. And to my listeners, I wish for you a week full of radical love, that you're able to practice it and receive it. And until next time, people will be balanced and be well, friends.
Thank you.